Hi everyone, I'm Rick, creator of Revelation Skirmish, which is a destructive combined arms miniatures game set in the Revelations universe. Now, in this assembly video, we're going to be building one of the biggest and baddest WarMech models that we have in our entire catalog, which is the Faust Union Juggernaut. Now, this one is designated as the firing position mech. It's got two hands holding on to the giant Toad's Fall rotary cannon. It is a super impressive piece, and I am beyond excited to be able to start getting this out into players' hands. It's 17 pieces, so it's not as many as the standing pose, which is 18, but it takes a little bit of finesse because it's going to be having both arms holding onto the cannon. So I feel that this assembly video is super critical to make sure that I can, as best, guide you guys to get it assembled the first time and in the best way. So if you're looking at all the different parts here, whether you bought them from us or you 3D printed them yourself, you're going to see that the two legs are separate from the pelvis. You have the torso, the head, both shoulders, the left and right arm. These are the shields that attach to the arms, the scattergun which attaches underneath the left arm, and then the Toad's Fall cannon is the base of the cannon, the shield that goes on front of it, and then three different rotary assemblies. So the first thing we're going to be working on is the lower half of the WarMech, because that's always important to get the legs kind of set up and out of the way, and then they have time to cure and fully dry while we move on to the upper part. So I like to personally start by making sure that the feet are level to how I feel that they're going to be posed. So kind of just plan them out, see how they're if they're going to be level enough, and if not, you just take a hobby knife or an X-Acto blade and kind of just shave it down until you get it to the point where you're satisfied. With the pelvis here, it's super important. You don't want to put this on backwards. This kind of upside down U panel, that is the front. On the back, you're going to see three different plates. They're little flaps that are connected here at the top, and we'll have alternate poses later that have the flaps in different kind of angles so that the hips can swing out a little bit further, but for this one, they're just straight on. But the flaps will be in the back. The upside down U panel is in the front, okay? You don't want to mess that up. So we'll put a little bit of glue here on the leg, and we know that he's going to be leaning, that back right leg is going to be kind of braced. So we're going to make sure that the pelvis is angled in the right way, that we're satisfied. And we'll put a little bit of glue here on the other leg. I like to hold both the legs together as they're fully drying, so that way if I have to break them apart, now's the time before they're fully cured. Different super glues will have different curing times, so you can really kind of mess with it differently. But I want to make sure that the feet are going to be relatively level, because sometimes I'll have basing material and stuff that kind of changes anyway, and I have to go back and either remove some of the basing material or trim a little bit more of the bottom of the foot off in order to get it to fit into the base. But I do want it to be as level as possible, and then to be satisfied with it, which I like that right there. So we're going to go ahead and take this, set this aside as we move on to, we're going to start working on the Toad's Fall cannon. So the first thing we're going to do is start gluing on these rotary assemblies, and it's important to kind of just pop them in, make sure that they're level. This one had like a little nub still left, and now if they're not level, they'll end up creating an issue for you later when it is time to glue them. All right, so we'll take the first one. We do not want to put too much glue. If you put too much, you will be unhappy with yourself because it will take longer to dry. Ask me how I know. We'll just put that in there, and we want to try to make sure that it's straight because we're going to have three of these, and we want to make sure that they're all kind of angled in the right direction. We don't want them kind of looking like a three-eyed, cross-eyed weapon. Three-eyed, cross-eyed. I didn't think that through. Here we go. That one's done, at least for the moment. Sometimes when you're gluing this many of them, they might get bumped around a little bit and they pop back out. Again, depends on the type of glue you're using. We'll do this other top one up here, kind of aiming it, which I know is not proper gun safety, but since they're 3D miniatures, I'm not in too much danger. But I kind of want to look at them head on as best I can, show you here on the camera, because you want to try to make sure that they're angled correctly, because you will be disappointed if one of them isn't. It'll look weird, and you'll see that one kind of drifts. You just got to kind of hold it and be patient. And the Juggernaut is one of those models that I feel it is worth the extra time to not rush through the assembly, especially this particular pose, because you need both arms to be holding onto the weapon, and that takes a little bit of finesse to kind of line those up to where you're satisfied. It just takes a little bit of patience. It's not a big deal. But for, you know, this is one of those models I don't want to get wrong for myself, because I personally am a big fan of it. As that's beginning to dry, we'll move on to the shield that is on the front of it. You'll notice on the back of the shield there are 3 holes that correspond to these 3 pegs. So we'll just put a tiny bit of glue on each of the pegs. You could decide to glue this on after you've painted it. That's up to you. I don't mind having this particular shield on right now, but I just want to point out for those who might want to do differently. Make sure that it is all lined up with the holes. Which basically, if you can get it lined up in 2, the last one should be, but anyway. So while this is drying, set that aside. And we're going to begin to discuss the torso. Now, with this particular thing, because this pose has us with both hands holding on, we want to make sure we kind of give time to do this in a different way than like with the standing pose for the Juggernaut. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have the shoulders lined up correctly, that I have the right one set aside, and that I have the correct arms set aside for that particular shoulder. So the shoulders, you'll notice, they're basically mirrored, but they're angled, so when they're attached to the torso, they're angled forward. So they're actually going to be like this, with the arms angled slightly different than, say, like with the standing pose, where the shoulders come out straight on, where the peg is straight on. And I'm not going to attach these shoulders right now. I want to make sure that they're going to go onto the arms the right way. So we're going to glue the forearms to the hands, which is to the Toadsfall cannon. That way, when it comes time to do the shoulders, we can kind of line things up and have a better strategy. If I start gluing these now, they're going to be at slightly different angles from one another, and then I'm going to be really disappointed, because then the cannon won't attach properly, and that's not going to be cool. We don't want to do that. So as long as we know that we have the right and the left shoulders set aside, we'll just leave those there with the torso. With the arms, the holes here, these peg holes, are for the arm shields, which you can just plug those in and glue them now, or if you do what I do and you glue those in afterwards, after you've painted them. So we'll just take them aside for now, so that way we can assemble the weapon. But the peg holes are going to be on the outside of the arm. You don't want to have them on the inside. So I know that if I'm looking at the arm, like if it was my own arm, right? If the peg hole is on the outside this way to the right, that is the right arm. If the peg hole is to the left, that is the left arm. So I want to make sure that those are set aside with the correct shoulder, so I don't glue those on incorrectly. What I'll do before I glue the scatter gun onto the left arm, I'm going to go ahead and start plotting out how the arm is going to go. So we know that the arms are going to attach. It's probably going to have to rotate slightly on the right arm, so then that way it can still hold on to the weapon. And this one, basically all of our other models are very straightforward for how to assemble them. This is currently our most, I would say, in my opinion, it probably is the most difficult, or the second most difficult, just because of you holding on to the other weapon. But it is such a cool pose when it's done. To me, it's worth the frustration when assembling. So what I personally think is the best strategy, kind of just lay the torso and then set the arms in. Don't glue anything yet. Only, like, I glued the Toadsfall cannon, that's one thing. I don't want to glue the forearms to the hands or to the shoulders, or the shoulders to the torso just yet. I want to try to get a decent idea of how this is going to assemble so that when it does come time for the glue, everything will be pretty close. So you can kind of do it this way, where you're kind of holding everything in a rough area, and then you can begin to start gluing some of the parts, or you can kind of play with it a little bit longer and feel really good about it before you start putting anything to be glued. I feel that that's looking pretty good like this, and I know this might be difficult for some people, and I apologize if I can't come up with a better alternative for how to assemble this. I feel fairly good about that. So what I could do is I could start gluing something on. So what I'll probably do is start with the left hand. Put a little bit of glue on here, a little bit on the top, and then we're going to take it and just set it in as I get a pretty rough idea of where it's going to be, but then that way that part can start to dry. That gets one part off of our plate. I feel that that's a good pose for it. So then what I might go ahead and do is start gluing on the left shoulder now. Not to the torso, just to the upper part of the bicep. And if it's possible, I'm going to try to hold this piece together too, because then that way, hopefully before the arm dries, I have it back in the proper angle. And I know that it was basically somewhere here, so we'll let it dry real quick to the shoulder. Now that that one's basically done, we'll go ahead and start working on the right wrist. Arm oriented. Just pop that in there. Put the hand into the socket and hold the arm there. And then, so now my focus is holding the right arm, you know, where I feel that it's going to need to be angled. Feel somewhere there. Give that a brief moment to dry, get in a semi-cured space. And we're getting pretty close to it being ready for the gluing in of the shoulders, which is a big step because then we've already got the arms working together for the most part. So now we're just kind of holding the shoulders. We want to make sure the arm is flat. I mean, like there we go. And see, it's starting to come together. You can kind of see it's hitting my arm, my hand's pretty good, but. And if I do it this way, I just feel that, you know, if there ends up being, like right now, there's a slight gap here in the right wrist. That's totally fine because these machines would be able to tilt some, just like our human hands can. So it's totally fine, I think, that if it's slightly out of the socket, because they would be able to do that around the wrist area. They don't have to just be able to just pivot. And now that I'm feeling fairly good about these arms, let that sit there for a second. As we get ready, we can start to glue these upper part of the shoulders, and we'll do both at the same time. Trying not to get glue anywhere else we don't want it to be. And then this way, now all we're doing is I'm basically, all my pressure is up here at the shoulders because the arms already glued the way that I want them to be. Now we're just holding it here for a moment as the shoulders dry in place. And it's already partially cured, so if we just brought it over to the legs, set it down on the legs, and start to kind of figure out if that's the angle that we want, if we want it to be higher, if we want it to be, we don't care, a little bit lower. I think being a little bit lower in this instance actually looks kind of cool. But if you wanted, you could have them, because once it comes time, because it's a ball joint, you know, at the torso here, so we could angle it a little bit differently. But I think basically if he ends up somewhere here, I think that would work. So let's go ahead and glue the pelvis on. I'm sorry, not the pelvis, the torso to the pelvis. And you can either just like let it sit directly into the pelvis socket, or if you push the torso forward or backward, it has a little bit more surface area to dry to. And I feel that sometimes it makes it a little bit more secure. So we're having this one a little bit more off center. I don't want it to be too crazy because I know the head is gonna have to go in there and I want the eyes to be aiming towards the target. So I wanna kind of just have it a little bit off center, and you can kind of just keep checking it. Like, you know, I have the pelvis here, just a little bit off center with the torso, and that way it's more like he's leaning into the shot, or, you know, bracing himself to make the shot. We can go ahead and just set him down. We've got most of the work completely out of the way at this point. So now we're gonna go ahead and start working on the scatter gun. Obviously, I don't want the scatter gun because you've got this rail system here as the top of the scatter gun, and that plugs in to the rail system underneath the arm. When it's in the firing position, the scatter gun would be like basically this far forward, but in the rail. Obviously, we don't want that because we're using the Toads Fall rotary cannon, right? So we're gonna want this to be in the stored position, which basically brings it to just about where the rail is hidden completely within the arm. The best way to glue this is to just go ahead and just put some glue on there. Pop it into the rail. And you just hold it there for a few moments and it should dry plenty fine without any issue. All right, with the scatter gun done, I'm not going to glue my arm shields in, but I am going to go ahead and attach them just so that you can see how he would look. And the arm shields are going to be horizontal to the forearm. So whichever position the forearm is in, just glue these in horizontally. And we're going to go ahead and prepare him for the base. Now, I don't like to paint the head, already attached to the model. So I would keep mine separate until it is time to assemble him 100% the whole way. You can either get a piece of sticky tack or something to kind of just hold it in place, or you can just glue it in if you'd prefer. I like to paint my Juggernauts. It has like a skull mask here on the front of his face. I like to paint that with a nice, like a white dry brush kind of look. So it looks kind of worn. It looks a little bit more spooky, and I feel that's a little bit more intimidating. So I like to make sure that my rear arc is going to be completely opposite direction of where my eyes or my optical sensors or wherever the torso is aimed. With the Juggernaut, he actually has a head. Some of the models like the Sierras or the Anyas, the Spades, like they don't have a face, right? So you just kind of just go from the center of the torso is what I treat as the eyes. So in this case, I'm gonna put a little bit of glue on either side of the outside of the feet because those are easiest for me to use a hobby knife later and cut them back off, because I will glue them to the base. That way I can play with them in game, and then I can always decide later to remove them if I desire to, in order to do the actual basing materials for the base. And there we are. The Juggernaut. Probably one of the most badass poses we could possibly think of for this big guy is finished. And a funny kind of like behind the scenes thing. This was the pose that had all of the artists and the modelers that worked on this project with me caused the most frustration, because this pose was 100% from the beginning needed to be done. The model needed to be posed or posable in such a way that you could recreate this exact position, and it was very challenging because you have to think of things with the shoulders and the way that the biceps can rotate, and then making sure that the elbows and the range of motion of everything worked. But we did it. After all that work, we were able to do it, and this is an incredible pose, in my opinion. And it's something that I'm very proud to be able to showcase and show off to our community and our player base. And I hope that all of you guys are just as excited as we are to be able to get these out there into your guys' hands. So thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to get one of your own Juggernauts, you can click on the link in the description, or you can go head on over to our web store. Talk to you guys later.